Here we go. We are live. Oh, it's been a while since I've said that, hasn't it? We're live. Okay, so welcome everybody to Disrupt Your Week. My name is Paul Blanchard, president of Habit Finder, the official Og Mandino company. Very excited, as usual, to be here with you every Wednesday. I've been doing this show or version of it for the last 6 years, and I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've missed a week. This is one of my favorite things that I get to do. I'm broadcasting both on Facebook Live at facebook.com/habitfinder and simultaneously on Clubhouse, which has been super fun to explore and connect with people. Really awesome. If you haven't had a chance to get in there and you've got an iPhone, I highly recommend that you find a way to get in there, but use with discretion. I'm almost to the point where we might need to set up a Clubhouse Anonymous group where we get in and introduce ourselves as addicted to Clubhouse or spending a little bit too much time on there. But with that said, with some great discretion, there's incredible people to connect with, great content. It's live, it's raw, it's unfiltered, it's interactive, all the things that I absolutely love. So fun to see some familiar faces jumping on here on Facebook. Again, we've got about a 20-25 minute presentation usually, which are usually just some thoughts that I've got from working with the one-on-one clients that I'm working with right now, or the thousands that I've worked with over the last several years, the thousands of group coaching and group mastermind clients that I work with, and then all the other platforms and the places that I speak, an opportunity to come on here and share some thoughts that I'm hoping will allow you to disrupt your patterns. That's what we're doing here. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll shut down Facebook Live. We really love all of you on Facebook. It's awesome, an opportunity to be able to share this content there. And we'll stay live on Clubhouse after that. So if you want to jump off of Facebook and join us on Clubhouse or join us there right now, it's completely up to you, whether you'd like to be able to see me or just hear me. I'm good either way. And then we'll stay on for the remainder of the hour after the Facebook presentation to answer questions and interact, bring anybody up on stage that wants to share their insights or ask their questions about their life, their business, their relationships, whatever it might be. So today we are talking about personality tests, and for a very specific reason. This is not the first time that I've been asked about personality tests. And I understand the natural bias that I have my own assessment. That I helped create an assessment called the Habit Finder, which is not a personality test. We actually call it, if you go to habitfinder.com, the unpersonality test for a number of reasons. We're going to talk about all these things today. However, I will say this up front, and I will say this many, many times. I am not anti-personality test, okay? I'll borrow from what Miriam and I were talking about earlier today, and it is the concept that guns don't kill people, people kill people, okay? Which is a really extreme example to lead into a segue to a personality test, because I don't believe personality tests kill people. However, I have major concerns, okay? Neurological, psychological concerns with how people use them and what impact they have on the brain. Now at Habit Finder, I've had the distinct advantage of getting to work with over 250,000 scientific samples. Okay, there are award-winning laureate psychologists out there that don't get access to that kind of data. And so I do feel advantageous. I do feel blessed to be able to have access to that kind of interaction, and have personally interacted with tens of thousands of those people in terms of talking to them about their results, about the impact, about how it shows up in their life, and all of these different things from a purely mathematical level. And we'll talk a little bit about the core of these two. So admittedly, I have my own assessment, but I'm not here to say it's better than a personality test. Okay. That's not true. I would totally say that, but I'm also going to substantiate why that is. But I'm not here to say that personality tests in and of themselves are bad. Okay. There are a lot of good things out there that if you use them incorrectly can be incredibly dangerous. Everything from medication to exercise to you name it. Okay, driving is it can be an incredible tool, but if it is used incorrectly, it can be very dangerous. So I just want to start right up front that if you hop off of Clubhouse, you get off of Facebook Live convinced that Paul hates personality tests, you weren't listening. If you are convinced that I believe that personality tests were created and they are evil, then you weren't listening. Okay. But with that said, I am not going to shy away from talking about some of the dangers. I'm not going to shy away from what actually happens in your brain, which is not usually what you think is happening. That's a huge part of the conversations we have in Disrupt Your Week every week is there's what you think is happening or what you think you are thinking. And then there's what your other mind is, what Og Mandino called it 60 years ago, which is incredible. It has been neurologically substantiated just in the last few decades. But the other mind that makes you, as Og said beautifully, makes you act in ways you do not comprehend. The research they've done just in the last 10 years of the influence and the power of the subconscious mind, of the seemingly irrational mind to your thinker brain. It seems irrational. There was a study I was reading recently that I've mentioned several times because it's still blowing my mind, where people were given simple options to consider and decide on. And an fMRI showed that the other mind, that their unconscious mind, the pattern-driven subconscious, actually made decisions up to 7 seconds before they thought they made the decision. That's pretty incredible to understand the power of this other mind. Now, at the end of the day, you are in the driver's seat. You are the chairman of the board in terms of your mind. But with that said, there are patterns that we don't directly choose to surrender to. We make other choices in life that by default cause us to surrender to them. We make choices that compound and create overwhelm and stress, depression, anxiety, multitasking, confusion, you name it. And when we are in these states, our consciousness is limited. It's like having everybody in your household plugged into the same Wi-Fi. The bandwidth goes down. The speed goes down of your consciousness, your brain, your inspiration, your prefrontal cortex, all the most beautiful parts of your brain and your creativity go down when we're in these states. And by default, we have this experience of surrendering to this other mind, to these patterns. Here's the challenge, though. This other mind is what mindset really is. Because you are not set. You are not a fixed position. You are dynamic. We have proven this mathematically. Mathematically, you are infinite. Meaning the more you learn about you, the more there is to learn about you. How incredible is that? How amazing is that? So both we have an infinite potential of learning, an infinite potential of discovery, okay, and an infinite potential of identity. But we've also got this brain that really prefers, strongly biased to being predictable and to being categorical, wanting to just find buckets to put things in, wanting life to make sense in its simplest terms. And because of that, we love labels. We love labels that we invite. We don't like labels that we don't invite, but we love labels that we invite. If we go out and ask for the label and we get one, we love them. What color we are, what bird we are, what number we are, okay? What Disney princess we're most like. Mine's Jasmine, okay? Don't be jealous, okay? But like whatever it is, we love labels because it soothes. It soothes a brain that just wants things to be simpler and easier. And if we can just say, oh, I'm that solves all my problems. Yeah, I know they think I'm a jerk, but it's because I'm that. It's okay. That's just what people like me are like. We're just starting to crack the door open in terms of some of the challenges with personality tests. But let's talk about the history. Let's talk about the inspiration for this conversation in the first place, okay? Yes, I have been talking about personality tests for a long time. I'm not anti-personality tests. I helped build one of the top 25 MBA programs in the world, and we put the DISC assessment into that curriculum. I'm a big fan of what they can do when they are used in low-stakes environments and when they are used for self-discovery and reflection and an introduction to where we're headed. But we'll talk about more in just a moment. But the reason I'm making it this topic this week, the reason why it's been even more on my mind than usual, is because of a documentary that was just released recently on HBO Max called Persona, The Dangers of Personality Tests. And admittedly, I haven't watched the entire thing. I'm about an hour and 5 minutes into it. Okay. And it takes about, it's an hour and 25 minutes long, I believe. So there's about 20 minutes I haven't finished. The majority of it, from what I've watched so far, leans heavily towards the use of personality tests in hiring and human resources. And I definitely have some incredibly strong and adversarial feelings about using it in that space, because it is so antithetical to the infinite potential of a human being. It is so antithetical to the development of culture. If your culture is built on go fish, you're looking for a very specific type of person and nobody else. That's not culture. That's not diversity. That's not learning to work with lots of different types of people and learning to be a great leader. That's just learning to make robots and have a system that was built over 100 years ago on industrial factories. You stand here and screw this lid on toothpaste. You stand there and make sure they were all screwed on tight. You stand there and make sure that none of the markings were smudged or whatever. Like, it was very simple, very archaic things that we were using these kinds of labels for in the past. And now it's 2021. We've discovered so much about the brain, so much about human potential. And over 100 years ago, over 120 years ago, okay, there was the creation, the first seeds planted for Myers-Briggs. And it talks about this in Persona. There's actually a mother and her daughter, who the mother turned her house into a laboratory of trying to understand the personality and shape the personality of her daughter. And then her daughter got out, moved away, excited to do so, I might add, not wanting to live in a laboratory anymore. But then World War II happened. And so she moved back with a handful of her friends. And now her mother had like 4 test subjects in this laboratory to figure out. And she started developing what eventually became the 16 types in Myers-Briggs, which was the mother, okay, of all personality tests. It was the first one. And there have been iterations, and science attempted to be bolted onto it. But it is important to know that the basis of personality tests is not scientific. Okay? I'm not saying that as a knock. I'm just saying it's fact. The basis of personality tests are not scientific. They are subjective psychological attempts at creating buckets. And I don't believe that the mother that kind of birthed Myers-Briggs did so to put people into boxes as much as I think. Let's start actually right now. Let's time out really quick and talk about the pros and cons of personality tests, because I think it's really important to understand that there are some really beautiful things that they can do. Number one, okay, the first pro to personality tests is they're a great introduction to you. If you're new to self-development, okay, the stakes are low. You haven't really spent a lot of time in introspection, haven't spent a lot of time creating higher levels of self-awareness. It's a great introduction. That's a pro. That's a great pro. It's a great introduction to your emotional preset. That's what a personality is it's emotional preset. It's not inherent genes or hereditary factors. Personality is driven by emotional presets. It's the emotions, in other words, that you have memorized. They are the most accessible patterns, emotional patterns that you have in your brain. And so pretty cool to get an introduction to your current presets. That's like opening up your GPS to find out what your current bearings are. But for you to open up your GPS and go, okay, that's where I'm currently at, and then you shut it off, sit down and just go, and this is where I'm going to stay. This is the personality I was born with. No, it's been shaped. But you have infinite emotional accessibility, and you can develop new patterns. You can develop new habits of thinking. Neuroplasticity has demonstrated that we're not stuck in any fixed way of thinking for the rest of our lives, and therefore we're never stuck in one particular type of personality. Here's an interesting thing to add as well. Most people have about 7 to 9 different personalities. So what you're actually seeing in a personality test is the aggregate of the most common traits that have usually been put into 4 to 16 categories to try and sum up you. Okay. So, but as an introduction, it's great. The con is it's restrictive. It's very naturally restrictive because you now put yourself in a box. If it's an introduction, it's the starting line. That's how you want to look at a personality test. If you look at it as the finish line, oh, now I know about me, and now I just need to learn to manage this existing preset. That, again, that's like being in the wilderness, pulling up your GPS, being like, oh, that's where I am, and sit down and figure out how to make shelter, because you never need to go anywhere else. You don't need to get back to civilization. You don't need to explore new places. You just need to figure out how to survive right here. That's the restrictive nature. That's the con of how personality tests typically get used. Whether you think you're doing that or not, your brain is built to create simplicity and labels and predictability. So it loves the idea of, great, let's totally just stay right here. Awesome. It's feeding that. It wants that. It desires that. So whether you think you're doing it or not, your other mind is really driving hard towards that. The next pro for personality tests is it provides significant insights. Okay. Although the basis of personality tests was not scientific, it's had science bolted onto it. It's had psychological evaluations and inductive sciences bolted onto it, which has given us some tremendous insights as to some hints and some clues and some ideas about how we might be experiencing our current emotional preset. Now, unfortunately, I don't think you guys listen to me because you want me to filter. Unfortunately, too many personality tests are written like fortune cookies, okay? They're written in such a way that it could apply to anyone. And they're written in such a way that it sounds like they're talking about you specifically, but anyone could read. You may have a hard time introducing yourself to people. Well, guess what? Even extroverts have certain situations, certain types of people where they have a hard time doing that. Why? Because no one is completely extroverted and no one is completely introverted, which is an interesting binary dichotomy that has been created by personality tests. That's where it came from, being an introvert or an extrovert. Everyone is intra-extroverted, and everyone is within about a 5% margin of that. Anyone to an extreme on one side or the other actually is experiencing some form of psychosis. Okay, so you may feel you have a bias or a preference to one side or the other, but that's very different from having an extreme psychological proclivity to one or the other. It just depends on the situation. It depends on the person. It depends on what you're experiencing. It depends on which emotions you're experiencing at that time and how you're choosing to interpret them. So that's a major challenge. The next pro, though, is the insights that you can get from understanding this as a starting position, as an introduction to starting to explore your current presets. The con is as soon as insights turn into identity, which I hear all day, every day. And in Persona, in the documentary on HBO Max, you hear people, oh, I am a FTJFR, I'm a 3, I'm a DI, I'm a da 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 da. Like you just hear it like crazy amounts, like layering on top of each other, the audio. And that's identity. As soon as you say I am and fill in the blank, you've now started to create a neurological connection to identity. I am a 3. I am a 7. I am a red. I am a yellow. I am an owl. Whatever. Okay. Now, again, that is not necessarily going to wreck your life. However, it is going to stunt your growth. It is going to challenge and put you against the grain of getting out of the box of what you now believe is just what you're born with, what you have to settle with, what you have to work with. Again, if you want to use this as an introduction and as great insights to your current emotional presets, awesome, do it. I've got my Enneagram right here, okay? I've done StrengthsFinder, I've done DISC, I've done Myers-Briggs, all of it. There's great insights, but look at them as insights and be incredibly cautious about those insights being converted to identity. Now, that's not unique to personality tests. At Habit Finder, we battle that all the time. And in fact, one of the most important things you can do to grow is realize that you are not your thoughts. It's the same battle of you are not your personality. It's not you. And getting an opportunity to create that appropriate disassociation is so critical. But it's hard to do because you got a brain that goes, ooh, label. That explains me. Yes. That makes me feel good about staying where I am. Yes. That allows me to justify what other people don't like about me. Yes. Okay. It loves that. So we're going to want to be aware of that no matter what tool we're using and no matter how we're trying to grow. Next pro to personality tests is it allows us to relate to each other. It gives us a reason to know, wow, I'm not the only one who thinks and feels in the general ways that I think and feel. Every single human being is unique. There are so many variables, it's insane. An infinite number of variables in how we experience life emotionally, physically, neurologically, kinesthetically, everything, okay? On and on and on and on. But to be able to go, oh, wow, there are other people that have some tendencies. I'm not a freak. I'm not alone. I think that's a beautiful thing that's happened from personality tests. I think it's a beautiful thing for people to find some kind of way to relate to each other when they may have felt very alone, very awkwardly different, or whatever the case was. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But the dark side, the con of that, is to justify. Oh, I'm just that way because it's my personality. Oh, I can't handle those situations because it's my personality. I'm not a morning person because it's my personality. Oh my gosh, really? You're not a morning person because of your personality? No, you're not a morning person because of your circadian cycles and because of when you go to bed and what time zone you live in and whether you're looking at TV screens and your other habits and what you believe and the stories you buy into about how that whole sequence works. Okay? That's not personality. Those are stories and patterns and thoughts. You have a certain personality that helps you justify and or get frustrated with and or grow beyond whatever you choose to do with it. But it's very important that as we relate to each other, that we don't use it to justify, oh, I just need to, the two things that I would never, ever tell someone to use a personality test for: hiring someone or who you should date. Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me? Dating, marriage, it's hard as hell, no matter what your personality type is, no matter what their personality type is. Working with human beings who have their own agendas, their own insecurities, their own problems, and trying to lead them with my own insecurities, my own problems, is hard no matter what the personality is. So let's seek to understand, not to overly simplify and blanket and label and categorize ourselves. So we can relate, that's beautiful, but don't justify. The last pro that I'll talk about before we wrap up today, and then we'll stay on Clubhouse for questions, interaction, anything like that. The last one is the last great pro to personality tests is they create reflection. Not just the results, taking them creates reflection. It creates this incredible opportunity to think about yourself. There's some great questions that get asked that are hard to answer. They're really hard to answer. And you get in there and you kind of like, oh, I don't know. Do I get angry more often than I get depressed? Do I this? Do I that? Do I strongly agree? Do I somewhat agree? Do I agree? Am I neutral? So on and so on. That's the premise of most predictive indexing or most forced indexing that comes from personality tests. Just asking those questions is really interesting. I think the reflection that it creates is really intriguing. It creates a curiosity. The con is it's subjective and it's forced. Okay? Going through a personality test, and again, I've been through many of them many times, is tantamount to me putting your MRI in front of you and saying, do you have a torn ACL? And you go, do I strongly agree? Do I agree? Am I neutral? Well, my knee hurts and it's hard to walk. So yes, I strongly agree that I have a torn ACL. No, that's what you're experiencing. That's what you'd like to think. And how many of those questions can people honestly say that they didn't answer with what they'd like to believe about themselves versus what actually is? How do I know this? I take all of our clients through an exercise about 2/3 of the way through our coaching program that is one of the most difficult things that we have people do, and they have to face things that they never realized were true about how their other people experience them. They never allowed to deeply sink in about how they are actually experienced. And it's hard to do that because we wanted to believe we were being experienced one way, and then when we hear otherwise, our typical reaction is to get defensive or to go, well, that's just because I'm that personality or whatever. But we've got to break through that to be able to tap into our infinite potential, to be able to become more. That doesn't mean you break through that and suddenly the world is your oyster. No, it's still going to be incremental millimeters, but it is still infinite number of millimeters, still an infinite number of baby steps to be able to grow and to be able to become more. So the reflection, amazing. The subjective, forced element of them, it's tough. It's really tough. If you read them in like a fortune cookie or your horoscope, we're like, wow, step back for a second. I promise you're going to see that they're written in such a way that it can apply to just about anyone. You take 4 to 16 personality types, and I guarantee you every human being on earth has experienced at some point in their life all of them. So it's cool to reflect on and understand which ones are more common, but to just, that's me, then I hope you're not an entrepreneur. I hope you're not a leader. Okay. And I hope you're not trying to drive towards a better life. Okay. If you love where you're at and you love the personality, no judgment. Seriously. Awesome. Cool. If it's working for you, great. But one of the toughest things we have to do here at Habit Finder is help people face themselves, what they think is working for them versus what is actually working for them. What they think about themselves and what they actually think about themselves. What they think about other people and what they actually think about other people. Not in terms of the context, not in terms of what they're thinking, but how they're thinking. Your brain, okay, when we really boil down to the core of it, all comes down to patterns and pattern recognition. So we add all this aesthetic context, all this deep, profound philosophy and ahas and entangled discussion around what we believe is our reality and what we believe is true about ourselves. And some of it's there. Some of it's in alignment. Some of it's not. That's what the Habit Finder measures. At the core of the assessment, Carl Jung was the inspiration for Myers-Briggs. This mother was listening, and Carl Jung said that human beings are inherently evil, and we are pitifully ignorant of this, and it will destroy us. That's an interesting premise for wanting to learn about people. I would lovingly compare that to Dr. Robert Hartman, who is the inspiration for the Habit Finder, who said, I'm in awe of human beings' natural ability to organize evil. How can we teach ourselves to more intentionally create good? And that's when he went into creating the formal science of axiological mathematics that involved Cantor's transfinite calculus and the formal science and the concept of infinitudes. Because Dr. Hartman wasn't concerned with exposing the evil. That was already obvious. That was already clear. He was interested in how do we measure more objectively, get rid of the social sciences, get rid of the ethics and the morality of good and bad, not to get rid of them entirely, but get rid of them in this conversation so we can build a base of science and math for good and bad. Then we can bring those things back into the discussion because now we have some mathematical boundaries. You try to claim war or declare war on math, and you lose every time. You lose every time. And so getting the opportunity to use that as a foundation for a discussion, a foundation for discovery, we realize that personality tests are driven by labels that you'll want to handle with care. Doesn't mean avoid them, don't do them, don't appreciate them. No, that's not the point. But handle the label with care, because the Habit Finder and personal development and becoming better is completely based on access. Are you taking an assessment that funnels you and pigeonholes you down into a label, or are you taking an assessment that opens you up to possibility and access? Okay, you've got 4 to 16 personality types typically in any of those. In the Habit Finder, you've got 6.4 quadrillion variables. And that's not even how many there are. That's just how many we could get access to be able to create a discussion much broader, much more infinite than personality. Now, personality should totally be a part of that conversation, but it should be with an open door. It should be as a starting line to be able to move forward. So again, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying they're dangerous in and of themselves. I'm saying that the way we've watched so many people use them, even when they thought they were using them constructively, we've had the opportunity to measure what your thinking patterns are actually doing with those labels. And it's not always worth the risk. Okay. Because there's what you think about what you think. And then there's what your other mind, that subconscious mind, actually thinks. That's the risk. And we're here first because that's what the habit finder measures. It doesn't measure personality. It doesn't measure behavior. It doesn't measure who you are. It doesn't measure your mental state. It just measures the risks in the patterns, the mathematical patterns of how your brain works. When you take it, it's super weird. You're going to think it's about some really dark things. It has nothing to do with the words and phrases. Those are all mathematical equations that allow us to be able to bypass your conscious brain and force your subconscious brain to reveal its cards. So yes, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel like you're painted into a corner. It's going to feel like you have no idea what you're looking for. That's why it's objective. That's why it works. If you've taken more than one personality test, you can start to see the different questions that line up with different colors, different letters, different numbers. You can see the forced indexing, okay? But if you take the habit finder, you have no idea what we're looking for. It's super weird. There's no questions, okay? And also when you're using math, you don't need a bunch of subjective triangulation. So it only takes you about 10, 15 minutes to do it, okay? And the easiest way to take it is go to habitfinder.com and take it. Right now, it's free. You get to take it for free. So you can go there. If you've taken one before, just go back to habitfinder.com and click login in the top of the screen and log back in first and then take it. And you can take it again. We recommend about every 6 months. You're going to want to understand how you're thinking. Now, not everybody is ready to take on how they think. Not everybody's ready to go to this level. They'd rather play in the realms of labels and behavior and emotional preference. And that's fine. That's not a totally ineffective way. It's just a temporary way. Your thinking patterns are your thermostat. Okay. And if you want to be able to change the thermostat of your success, the thermostat of your life, the thermostat of your peace and love and success, you've got to change the patterns of thought. Not what you're thinking. You're always going to think crazy stuff, okay? You're always going to think stuff you would never want anybody else to hear is going on in your brain. You're always going to think weird and interesting and all kinds of stuff and everything in between. It's the patterns that matter. That's what the brain operates on. The habit finder is the only assessment I know out there in the mainstream that scientifically and objectively measures the patterns of your hidden habits of thinking, of your subconscious mind, your downstairs brain, whatever you want to call it. So again, this is not a case against personality tests. You can make your own call on that. So I have no doubt there's people listening here on Clubhouse, on Facebook, that have benefited from the introduction, the insights, the relatability, and the reflection that personality tests afforded them. I'm just asking you to proceed with caution that you don't get sucked into the restriction, identity, justification, and forced subjectivity that comes from the shadow side of these tools. Okay? All right. We ran a little bit over today. I hope this was helpful. If you've got anybody that is in love with their personality test, tag them, share this out. Let people hear this. I want to make sure they know that I'm not here as anti-personality test, other than using it to figure out who you should date and who you should hire. Okay? You want to use something that makes an impact on how you interview, how you interact, how you train, how you support your people, how you develop your culture, not something that creates a Tetris of personality categories, figuring out how to fit. That's not how human beings work. And if you've been a leader in a business that has tried to do that, try to get everybody to remember what personality is on this person's forehead so you can interact in a certain way. You know what's great about getting underneath personality is you find out that there are ways to connect with human beings no matter what their personality is. What? There are ways to connect. There are ways to sell. There are ways to interact. There are ways to inspire. There are ways to be able to create your dreams and to be anything you want to be, any profession, any skill, regardless of your personality. So if you want to start with that introduction, do it. Awesome. More power to you. If you want to be able to move into access transformation, you're going to want to know the patterns of thinking that are in the base of your brain. So that's it for me today on Facebook. Everybody on Clubhouse, please stay on. If you're on Facebook and want to jump on Clubhouse, jump in. We're going to have some questions. We're going to have some interaction. I've got a special guest that I want to share a couple of insights as well from from a psychotherapist perspective and psychological perspective. And that's it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.